Christopher Murgatroyd was in the middle of organising his family tree when he remembered his uncle's old computers. There must be something on there about our family, he thought, before going over to the storage unit to have a look. While wading through his stuff, he came across his computers. He booted up the old computer and came across a huge file. He decided to have a look to see what his uncle had been up to. When he clicked on the link, he was surprised to see that his uncle had been filming in his own house. He then noticed that the date was the day that his uncle had died in the accident. But what came across the screen next changed everything. Hi, my name's Sara Jade and welcome to my channel, where we talk about true crime, solved cases and more. Now let's get into this week's case. Peter was 58 years old and lived on his own in West London. He grew up in Greater Manchester with 3 of his siblings and was described as having a great sense of humour. He had a laugh and got on well with everyone. He was happy, bubbly and was always there for everyone else. Peter was described as a good man who would help anyone. He is also a bit of a loner and was described as quite vulnerable. At the age of 58, he had moved down to Northolt, on the outskirts of London, into a small bungalow. He never married or started a family and lived alone, and spent most of his time fixing computers and camera equipment, and this is where he would go online to meet new people. In the early hours of the 6th of January, Peter's neighbours were awoken by fire engines. When they went outside to investigate, they discovered that Peter's house was on fire, and he had died in his sleep. Peter kept himself to himself and didn't really know anyone in the area. However, they did know that he had computers and lots of equipment in his house and believed that he had just died of electrical fire. His post-mortem came back clear and suggested nothing out of the ordinary. They did find that he'd inhaled some of the smoke, so they believed he'd died in his sleep. After investigation, they concluded that the fire had started from a faulty light bulb, and the house had set on fire when Peter was asleep in his bed. Over a year later, in November 2014, Peter's nephew, Christopher, was looking for information on his family tree when he decided to look through Peter's computers, and that's when he came across a large file. When opening up the file, he realised that Peter hadn't died in an accident, and to his horror, he was watching Peter be murdered. He called the police straight away, and the police came to investigate the video. When they searched through the footage, they found that a 26-year-old Jason Marshall had been with him that day. Jason Peter Marshall was born in Greenwich in South London on the 11th of August 1988. He was born to drug-addicted parents, and by the age of 10, both his parents had been arrested, and he was put into care in the South End. He bounced from foster home to foster home until eventually his mum got out of prison and he was placed back with her. Jason had a difficult childhood, and he was diagnosed with borderline autism by the age of 12. He was socially awkward and found it very hard to make friends, so he'd retreat inside his imagination and suffered from anxiety and depression. As Jason grew up, he saw the respect a uniform could get him, so he began to dress up and fantasise about working in positions of authority. Unfortunately, at the age of 20, Jason's mental health deteriorated, and he was sectioned under the Mental Health Act for trying to commit suicide. He was taken to the John Howard Centre and was flagged as being highly dangerous. He absconded just 3 weeks later and went through a series of hospital visits and prison placements before finally being released in 2012 under the care of his primary health physician. He was given a bed at a hostel and was given a job as a cleaner. He cleaned the streets after the Olympics, but it wasn't long before he lost his job and spiralled into depression again. He started to drink quite a lot and would dress up as a policeman and just go around the tubes pretending to solve crimes. It was around this time, after losing his job, that he set up a Badoo dating account where he'd offer his services for £400 per hour. On the 29th of December 2012, Peter met Jason on the site, and they planned to meet up a few days later at Peter's house. Jason arrived at Peter's house on the 6th of January 2013 in his pretend police gear. After some small talk, they started to talk about sex, and Jason took on the role as an interrogation officer, questioning Peter and told him to get on the bed. At first, Peter was content with playing along, but when Jason started to get violent, he became concerned. At one point, Jason pulls out a knife, and starts to threaten Peter, saying he's going to cut out his tongue if he doesn't tell him his PIN number. He starts to inject him with what he calls the truth serum. It was later found that this was an antipsychotic drug and would have no effect on Peter. Peter eventually relented and gave Jason his PIN number. Jason quickly left the house, leaving Peter tied up to the bed, and went to the nearest cash point to get as much money as he could. Before Peter was able to get out and get himself some help, Jason returned to the house, and this time he intended to finish him off. Peter was begging for his life as Jason pulled out the cling film, wrapped it round his head, and smothered him to death. After Peter finally passed out, Jason calmly lit a cigarette. He still pretended to be a policeman and spoke into his walkie-talkie, asking for help. He then made a cross across his chest and muttered something in Latin. Eerily, while this was going on, Classic FM was playing in the background. Jason then starts moving around the house and disposing of any evidence. He flushes some things down the toilet and gathers all his belongings. He then goes about ransacking the whole place to hide any evidence that he may have left. During this time, the video feed is knocked off, but the sound is still going. He is then heard splashing something around the whole apartment before the sound of a lighter is heard. As he sets the house alight, he calmly picks up his stuff and walks out of the house. Peter's death was ruled as an accident, as investigators believed it was a faulty light, and believed that Peter had died in his sleep in the fire. Jason had gotten away with murder until his nephew's discovery. This discovery, however, came too late. He fled the country after murdering Peter and bought a plane ticket to Rome on Peter's credit card. To cover his tracks, he sent Peter loads of messages through the app, apologising for not turning up that night and asking him why he was ignoring him. He was already looking for his next victim when he got to Rome and had spent all the money he had got from Peter, when Vincenzo, a divorced father of one and a retired tour operator, invited him into his house. Vincenzo was born in the province of Brescia, but was a lifelong resident of Tor Venecia. He had worked as a tour operator and lived alone, and was described as a solitary man. When Jason turned up at Vincenzo's house that day, they too started with small talk, before Jason started to act out his roleplay. He told Vincenzo to strip and to get onto the chair. He tied him to the chair and began questioning him straight away, beating him and spraying him with pepper spray while asking him for his PIN. Jason left him tied up there while he went to the cash point and withdrew €400 before returning back to the apartment. After returning to his apartment, he ransacked the whole place. He stole his card, his gate key, and his hard drive. He then proceeded to strangle Vincenzo with an electric flex from his bedside lamp. He then stabbed him 4 times. It wasn't long before Jason was after his next victim after spending all his money, and just a week later he met a man called Umberto. Umberto was a single man who lived alone and was interested in S&M, and Jason thought this was a great next victim. However, what he didn't know was that he was being watched by the police. Vincenzo's body was found a week later, after he had missed 3 or 4 appointments, and his neighbours became concerned because his lights were always on, so they called the police. When searching the house, they came across Vincenzo lying dead on the floor. He was naked except for a wire wrapped around his neck. After checking his phone, they discovered that he'd been speaking to a 26-year-old man called Jason. They then discovered that Jason was using his credit cards, but they didn't have enough information to arrest him at this point. They decided to put Jason under surveillance, and this is where they saw him going to Umberto's flat. They camped outside Umberto's house to make sure Umberto was safe and to keep an eye on him. However, nothing was happening and their shift was ending, so they decided to go home. The reason nothing was happening was because Umberto preferred to have dinner and chat rather than get involved in Jason's games. Jason, on the other hand, soon became irritated as he had just come there to rob him, so soon he started beating him, asking him for his PIN number. He beat him with his truncheon and pepper sprayed him in the eyes, and this went on for some time before Umberto gave him his PIN number. When Jason left the house to go and get the money, Umberto screamed and his neighbours heard, and they called the police. They soon tracked Jason's phone and found that he was on a bus leaving the area. They found the bus and stopped it and arrested him. On him, they discovered items to disguise himself as a police officer, including a truncheon, a pistol, and a badge for the British Embassy. He started telling them that he worked for the British Embassy and had diplomatic immunity. They also found possessions on him, that linked him to the other murders, including Vincenzo's gate key. Jason was arrested and was charged with murder, and on the 9th of July 2014, he was sentenced to 22 years in prison. But after an appeal due to his mental health, they believed that he had a personality disorder. They reduced this to 16 years. After the discovery of Peter's hard drive, Jason was deported back to the UK in February 2017 and was arrested for Peter Fasilio's murder. He claimed he had amnesia and couldn't remember the last couple of years. The prosecutors said he tortured his victims for sexual gratification. He was eventually convicted at the Old Bailey and was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 39 years before he is eligible for parole. The case also raised questions on why on the original investigation they didn't realise that Peter's cars were used after his death. This was a huge failing by the police. This case has also been likened to the case of Stephen Port, who killed 4 men from a dating site by injecting them with an overdose of a date rape drug. Thank you for watching, and if you like this video, be sure to check out another one of our videos here. Thank you for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.
You call me a saint, but you know I'm a stranger, a willing and able.